when they tanned with natural materials, hemlock bark or whatever the bark was that they used in big quantities. That boats used to come in with bark and stuff, and I think the smell came more after they started using chemicals. No, that's what I was told.
Interesting. Wow.
And I was thinking when it comes out of the tannery, it would come out like a big whoosh. Sometimes.
The lagoons,
the smell.
It's kind of like the...
Well, anyway, nobody likes a tannery. Oh, except the workers. And as we talked against the tannery, it was never against anything like that because it was just the smell. People worked there and they were probably accustomed to it, but anyway.
In a picture. When Jerry had a boat, we went along the shore, and this was on the shore where they were dumping into the lake. And so I asked Janet the other day, I says, can Jerry dig up a couple of those pictures?
Oh my.
And
okay. All right. How did the changes affect you and your family or your business if you had one?
Well, it really ruined the business. I mean, that part that people couldn't take it.
Did you take any action during the time of pollution, such as writing letters or contacting government officials?
I have a file.
Make a copy of that one.
From 1975.
We have stuff in our house.
We did, but when we moved to the condo, I think between Debbie and Janet, they have most of that stuff. Hid someplace, but that's where I got it, was from Janet.
What kind of stuff? Did you write letters to the city or
I have them. Oh, yes. City council. Mostly, I think, mostly. Our personal letters.
I used to go to the meetings. It was between the DNR and the tannery on the pollution. That I can't remember exactly. It was in Grand Rapids or at Kellogg Center at Kalamazoo and so forth going. And then all of a sudden, their next meeting was in Ironwood, western part of the Upper Peninsula. I think they just didn't want me to come anymore. That's the hint I got. Maybe that might not be it, but that's just the feeling I got.
Were they accommodating when you had these meetings? Did they listen to you? Did you believe that they were going to do anything to better it?
Oh, they were always going to, yeah, but just the DNR, they got along good. I'll put.
Were you, when you were young, let's say before you started working at the tannery, were you aware of White Lake's pollution problems?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of the pollution problems I've talked about since are false.
When did you first start hearing about pollution in the lake?
Well, I didn't hear about pollution in the lake till I started working in the tannery.
Okay.
Then I heard complaints about people talking about tannery polluting the lake. In fact, while I was working at the early days at the tannery, I got a call from a lady in Montague that said she heard that we were throwing spoiled hides in the lake. And I said to her, listen, lady, we couldn't afford to throw spoiled hides in the lake because we have a hard time getting any hides. So I said, we certainly wouldn't be throwing anything away, even if it was a little bit tainted.
That's one of the things that I'm most proud of, is the fact that we were able to buy that piece of property and the piece of property down by
by the mill pond?
by the mill pond there. So We spent a lot of money. I mean, maybe today probably wouldn't be too popular on that, but I think we spent about $700,000 on land, and then we spent another $280,000 in legal fees suing the tannery and the state.
Well, how did that come about? I mean, it was in the news, there was a lot of public attention to it after this article came out. What made the city council decide to take action?
Just a willingness, I think, to want a cleaner environment, a clean town, and a clean lake. You know, we kind of made a commitment that when I was on council anyway, that we would do whatever we could to, you know, improve the, you know, I think we kind of thought green in a way. I'm not sure they do today. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, politics goes in waves. You'll have one group in there for a while, and when they fall out of favor, then you get the other one, and it just keeps going back and forth.
Like I say, White Lake and Muskegon Lake are kind of like twins in a way. Muskegon Lake is larger, but they both suffer the same consequences. They were listed as areas of concern by the IGC.
What was the community reaction when Wint and Bob and people like you raised these issues?
Well, to start with, it was pretty, well, you know, non-committal. Oh, poo-poo, that kind of thing. Eventually, when they got Hooker involved, and it created enough pressure to where the plant actually closed down, people lost jobs. It got pretty nasty for a while. I remember Mary Mahoney was very involved in picketing out there. I think Ralph Rose even laid down in the road to keep vehicles from going out in and out of the plant gate.
And that was in relation to the Hooker chemical.
Yeah, that was Hooker, yeah.
So the tannery itself, people were not as much concerned about, but when the Hooker chemical issue came up.
Then they started getting concerned about what's happening to our lake.
The article in Audubon I thought was rather revealing. I know it's kind of boring to read things, but this is the one where basically they kind of realize that something's got to be done, and they come up with the vault, all right? And that it says Montague and the Temple of Doom. This is from the Audubon, 1985, September 85, okay. A massive pyramid enclosing 1 million cubic yards of toxic chemical waste rises near the shore of Michigan's White Lake, an everlasting reminder of how one community traded its clean, safe environment and pleasant wooded lake for an expanded tax base, 100 jobs, and deadly poisons in its air and water. And actually, you know, they said this is something like the size of like something like I wrote it down here. The base is 800 feet square. It's the size of 14 football fields, and that's the Temple of Doom. And you know, I sometimes feel like we all should go out and walk around it about every 3 years as a reminder of what's out there. And it's not something that's disappeared. It's there. And in this Audubon article, there's cross sections, etc. It's built like an Aztec temple with different layers, etc. And it's amazing.
Just the perspective that I gained from this is that we just need to be responsible with what we do, whether it could be anything from a citizen, you know, throwing trash out of their car, causing that kind of a environmental eyesore, to industry behaving in a responsible way.
I think that White Lake is becoming a very healthy lake. I think fishing has improved. I think if you listen to the people from Grand Valley, they'll tell you that it's much healthier, and I think it's come a long way, and it's done very well. And it still has a ways to go, but I think that it has. We've gained an awful lot, and we've come a long way, and I think we're a long ways back towards being able to And it was my thing at one time. I tried to get everyone to put on White Lake the Beautiful on their stationery, because if you don't blow your own horn, who's going to? And the cities, the townships, the businesses, everyone should have that on their envelopes, their letters, Whitehall on White Lake the Beautiful, Montague, and so on. Because if we don't say that, who else is going to? And I think we need to work to overcome that image of having a bad environmental image, because we have come a long, long way.
I think I became much more aware of it when I started reading more and more about what was happening to the people that lived around Love Canal. And I certainly supported my husband wholeheartedly, even though I didn't participate in any of the demonstrations, because, well, I walked the fine line with my own family because my brother worked for the chemical plants. And I wish to inject something here, that the community was very provincial and naive. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I actually mean it in a very admirable way. They couldn't believe Hooker could possibly do something undercover and behind people's back that were going to destroy the beauty and pollute the community. So they believed everything that Hooker fed them, which we later found out a lot of them were lies. And but the community was of the old mindset where when you shook hands on something, a handshake was a binding contract. And I don't think the community, many in the community could possibly believe that Hooker would do something undermined. And of course we all know they did.
When did you first remember hearing about pollution associated with White Lake or Hooker Chemical?
I don't exactly know how to answer that question. I guess after the plant became operational, we knew intellectually that where there were chemical industries, there were pollutions. At that time, we still thought of things going away. We weren't aware that there is no away. And I think that there was a definite loyalty of employees to their employer. People didn't switch jobs. They stayed with the one company and were promoted from within. It was totally different at that time. And growing up in Niagara Falls, where pollution was just a way of life.
When did you become aware of pollution issues related to White Lake?
I was pretty young when we always knew Hooker. We didn't know the extent of the problems that they were creating, but they had emissions that we could smell. Our driveway's half-mile long, so there's certain things that didn't come in this far, but we could smell. It was kind of a sweet smell. And when we smelled the emissions, my mom would call, and Mrs. Johnson, I remember, were the ladies in the neighborhood that mostly would call to alert them that, you know, maybe they had a problem. So
They called Hooker Chemical?
I think there was a Mr. Colpois that they talked to. I can't think of his first name, but that was his name. Mr. Colpois was kind of their PR man, so.
Oh, Dwayne Colpois.
Okay, all right.
The plant manager.
Right.
Were you aware of any other effects from the pollution? I know we heard people talk about trees that were damaged by pollution discharges.
I was pretty young when that happened, but I do remember it. We had taken a trip as a family to the UP. My dad always wanted to go up north if we went anywhere. If we weren't at the cottage, we'd take a little trip once in a great while. Normally, we're just happy to be here, but yeah, we came home and everything was brown from Old Channel Trail, like halfway to the lake up our property. Everything had been, it wasn't, I'm not sure that it was all defoliated, but everything turned brown. The pine needles turned brown, and a lot of our pine trees never came back. And there was a settlement. They gave us, it was probably a lot of money back then, a couple $1,000s. I remember my mom buying us a chainsaw with the settlement money, and we had to keep track of our hours. My older brothers were old enough to run a chainsaw. So for several winters, all 5 of us kids were cutting and burning treetops and just cleaning up the mess that was left. Most of the hardwood trees all came back, but I think it damaged the trees. You know, you can't defoliate a tree in the middle of the summer and not have it cause some damage, permanent damage. So
when I first knew about the chemical companies moving here, I was in high school because I graduated high school in 1960. And one of my really good friends was a young woman named Peggy Crock, and she and her family had moved here in about 9th grade because her father was either a chemist or a manager at DuPont. And so what my first introduction to the chemical companies was through Peggy, and going over to her house, and she had this beautiful house, and her parents were such lovely, educated people, so that I just thought very highly of that the chemical companies were coming and bringing educated people and really nice people to our area.
Because of whatever they were emitting into the air. I used to ask the plant manager about that, and Hooker always blamed DuPont, and DuPont would blame Hooker. So I never did find out what I was breathing, but I often wondered what it was, but it took your breath away.
What was your understanding of the pollution problem from talking to Wint and Bob, or just hearing it from other people in the community?
That it was serious. It was polluting water supplies and the lake, of course. And the type of pollution in the lake was, not the fertilizer stuff, but things you couldn't see. And contaminating, fish and wildlife, and might be a permanent situation.
Observer, yes, that's right. All the articles were written about Hooker coming in, and the mentions of my grandfather here and there, because he started a group called the White Lake Improvement Association, which was 13 property owners to fight Hooker. Of course, he had the most to lose because Hooker had purchased the property, which was Dowie Point, the old Dowie property, which was purchased from Dowie by Struven. So Struven actually owned the property that was right next to his, that included Dowie Point. And so he had the most to lose if there was going to be a factory built right next to his home on the bluff and our cottage down there. So he started the White Lake Improvement Association, which was 13 land property owners. And I'm sure his main concern, of course, was the value of this property, and so were the other ones. But he also, I know, was thinking about the environment, because I just know who he is. And there was one quote where he said they wanted to make sure that the lake stayed good for boating and fishing and recreation. So I'm sure that's what he's thinking of, was the environmental impact.
I would go ahead and say it was probably even when I was like 11 or 12 when I first came up here. You weren't that aware of anything, but I can just remember the smell at certain times if you were laying in bed and the wind was blowing in a certain direction. You could go ahead and smell it, or when you'd be driving by on the road if the wind was in the right direction.
What did it smell like?
Wow. I'm going to go ahead and for me, I guess what I remember is just you know, if you drove through Gary, you have a chemical smell. It was that kind. It was just not a pleasant smell. I think that would be the best way of describing, at least from what I can remember.
And as a young boy, you noticed that, but you didn't really associate it with pollution?
Not really. All you knew is that the chemical companies, you know, were here, and you just knew it wasn't a great smell, but you would kind of, that was just part of the area. For 98% of the time, or 99% of the time, it wasn't even a factor, you know, for me anyways, in being here.
Yeah, there was mistakes made at that time.
Well, as a worker, did you ever wonder about the practices, or did you just trust that they knew what they were doing?
No, it didn't bother us any. We knew that if we had a chlorine leak that you had to fix it right quick, because chlorine is deadly. And we had gas masks that we could wear. And so there's 4 chemicals: fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine, that are the most deadly chemicals. And we had fluorine in our reactor in DuPont, and we made chlorine at Hooker. So we had 2 of the most deadly chemicals known to man, and we handled them good. Like I say, occasionally we had a leak, but we fixed them. And other than that, nobody had any concern about their health. I'm 76, so I guess if anybody should be dead, I should be dead by now if if those chemicals were something that was going to kill you down the road.
When you put things out back at Hooker, did anybody raise questions about that?
No.
And what did you think of the job? Was it a good job?
I loved the job. I probably had, if I was younger and didn't have a family, I might have gone into total chemistry.
Did you have that kind of a background for the job?
No, just went in and learned.
Do you remember, or are you comfortable sharing your pay rate? Or?
It wasn't good, but it was good to me in those days, of course. Like I say, I was raised during the Depression, and that money was good. And it was for everyone. There wasn't a lot of money around at that time either, when I first was employed there.
Do you remember when that may have been?
I think it was about 1958 when I was there first. See, Hooker was very young at that time in the area.
Do you recall any of your first thoughts when you heard of DuPont and, well, actually Hooker Chemical and some of the other chemical companies coming to town?
Of course, it was a good thing for Montague. Everybody was welcoming.
Do you remember anything that people said, or?
No, I don't. Not particularly.
You know, but people were feeling good about it.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Do you have any memories of, or want to talk at all about the controversy when concerns about pollution came up?
You know, I think it's my opinion that there was a degree of innocence. They really, I don't believe they knew much about the hydrocarbons at that time. And this was a good place because of the salt and the water, which was needed for the processes.
We hear every side, and they were all strong in their views.
Until our friends over in Montague could not drink the water.
Yeah, then we really
became.
So you had friends in the Montague area?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Who had contaminated
Blueberry
water.
Ridge area.
Okay. And we've interviewed them, some of them also. What were your concerns about the pollution? Did you have any specific concerns about how it might affect you or your family or the community?
Very much so. I did not allow the children to swim in the lake at that time.
Yeah, when that all
You know,
came
so
out.
we were concerned for our immediate family.
And there was issues, I think, talked about. They said there was more lupus in the area than other areas, and birth defects, this type of thing, which I don't know proved true or not, but there was that
Well,
thought.
they're still, you know,
Yeah.
checking on the cancer thing.
What did you think of the local protests about pollution? Because at certain times there were, you know, some pretty vociferous protests.
Yes, there were.
We privately supported them.
Yeah.
We were in our late 20s. You know, we built our
Little
first house.
kids.
We had little kids. You know, I had been raised that, you know, when people told you, you know, this was happening, oh, okay, you know, I mean, it was the same with like doctors. If you went to a doctor and he said you take this, this, and this, no, you never questioned that kind of stuff. Not until, you know, we were on bottled water did we all finally get, oh, come on, no, this is ridiculous. They are giving water to, you know, 12 or
reason.
15, you know,
Yeah.
water to us. There's a reason for this. And so that's when we started really trying to organize. And, you know, Bev and I, at the time, I don't remember what our positions were in the association, but we started writing letters to anybody that we thought could be of assistance. I mean, after we talked to the city, we talked to the township, we wrote letters to the state, to all of our legislators,
Yeah. You know, when it really broke that something was going on here was I had a call from an AP reporter, and I told her everything that was happening here. They had not been getting that information in Niagara Falls. The plant manager here was kind of keeping it under the table, you know, trying to save his job, I guess. But this AP reporter wrote an article, and it went all over. And the president or whoever in Niagara Falls called me at my home and called me a liar. Said, this is not happening there, you are lying. I said, well, then come visit us. And remember, he came out, and then all of a sudden they started getting very, very nice to us. And he realized the plant was in deep trouble, and his plant manager had not been giving them all the information.
Did you have another time where there was a leak where you had to evacuate?
Yeah, this one was interesting. It was after my father first started working there, and it was a Sunday afternoon. And when we were kids, my folks never went to movies. We got TVs, they never went to movies. Entertainment was a kind of fun thing, was take a ride. And my father never ceased to amaze us. He would take us on a ride somewhere, and we'd go off in the backwoods on 2 tracks on roads we've never seen before. I mean, we knew the lakeshore all the way to Ludington. I know every 2 track and every road north of Montague all the way to Ludington from a kid. But you go off toward Mesquite or Newego and those areas out there, he would take us off in those directions, and he hunted and fished out there. And we had hardly ever been there. We'd go to beautiful rollaways over the Muskegon River. We'd take rides. Well, all of a sudden, we get a phone call, and he answers the phone, and and okay, kids, we're going for a ride. We took off. Jumped in the car, yay, we took off, because we knew if we took off on a ride, we'd end up someplace where we'd either get a nice meal or some hot fudge sundae or something like that. It was kind of cool. And it must have been during school. It must have been in the fall or spring. I can't remember which. So we took off on this unexpected, boom, ride. Well, it was fun. Got back, and the next day I went to school, Sunday, and I got talking with my friends who lived up and down Whitbeck, 2 of them, 1 male, 1 female, and they too went for a ride that Sunday afternoon. And we started asking questions. Of course, we were like, 7, 8, 9. We were pretty precocious. And there had been a leak And so they had called the employees that lived, of course the prevailing wind is out of the south, and we live north of Hooker on Wetback. And now, and then of course we're all sitting around going, well, what about all our neighbors? What about our friends? You know, they did not have the, you know, they didn't work at Hooker. They didn't get that phone call.
And I think it reflects the Great Lakes has become a priority, a lot like what the old Chesapeake Bay effort was in the Everglades. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, federal Congress and the agencies are putting in their effort to restore, you know, and delist these areas of concern around the Great Lakes. So it's showing the results of that effort, and that hasn't necessarily just been because they recognize that. The community, people around the Great Lakes, you know, our public advisory councils all play a role in that, of sending that message to our elected officials. You know, you have the money. It's where you're putting it. It's the priority. That's important. You know, let's take care of this. Let's get this taken care of. It's been 87, that's 26 years. I never thought it would take that long. I never in a heartbeat thought it would take, when we started in the 90s. I kind of figured, maybe 2005, but what, it's 12 years, and there's no way it could take that long.
So what do you hope this project brings to future residents?
Well, what I'm hoping is that, you know, we were put on the map for pollution in the late 70s and early 80s. We were put on the national map. We were a poster child for pollution. And, you know, it's just what happened. I'd like us to be back on the map as a poster child for recovery. And I would like this book to, you know, lay out that story.
I would think going back to hers, you know, it has to be a local vigilance on things. You can't assume that the state and federal government or even local government is going to protect the environment. You have to be vigilant. There are agencies, they will help you, but they don't have the wherewithal normally nor the concern unless you squawk.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, don't worry, you know, if you think, oh, well, you're not educated enough to do this. If you know right and wrong, and do whatever you can do to make phone calls or whatever.
When did you first start hearing about pollution in the lake?
Well, I didn't hear about pollution in the lake till I started working in the tannery.
Okay.
Then I heard complaints about people talking about tannery polluting the lake. In fact, while I was working at the early days at the tannery, I got a call from a lady in Montague that said she heard that we were throwing spoiled hides in the lake. And I said to her, listen, lady, we couldn't afford to throw spoiled hides in the lake because we have a hard time getting any hides. So I said, we certainly wouldn't be throwing anything away, even if it was a little bit tainted.
That's one of the things that I'm most proud of, is the fact that we were able to buy that piece of property and the piece of property down by
by the mill pond.
When they tanned with natural materials, hemlock bark or whatever the bark was that they used in big quantities, that most used to come in with bark and stuff. And I think the smell came more after they started using chemicals. No, that's what I was told.
Interesting. Wow.
And I was thinking when it comes out of the tannery, it would come out like a big whoof sometimes.
The lagoons,
The smell.
it's kind of like the...
Well, anyway, nobody likes a tannery, except the workers. And as we talked against the tannery, it was never against anything like that because it was just the smell. People worked there and they were probably accustomed to it, but anyway.
In a picture. When Jerry had a boat, we went along the shore. And
mostly our personal letters.
I used to go to the meetings that was between the DNR and the tannery on the pollution. That I can't remember exactly. It was in Grand Rapids or at Kellogg Center at Kalamazoo and so forth going. And then all of a sudden the next meeting was in Ironwood, western part of the Upper Peninsula. I think they just didn't want me to come anymore. That's the hint I got. Maybe that might not be it, but that's just the feeling I got.
Were they accommodating when you had these meetings? Did they listen to you? Did you believe that they were going to do anything to better it?
Oh, they were always going to, yeah, but just the DNR, they got along good, I'll put it.
Were you, when you were young, let's say before you started working at the tannery, were you aware of White Lake's pollution problems?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of the pollution problems I've talked about since are faults.
By the mill pond there. So we spent a lot of money. I mean, maybe today probably wouldn't be too popular on that, but I think we spent about $700,000 on land, and then we spent another $280,000 in legal fees suing the tannery and the state.
Well, how did that come about? I mean, it was in the news. There was a lot of public attention to it after this article came out. What made the city council decide to take action?
Just a willingness, I think, to want a cleaner environment, a clean town, and a clean lake. You know, we kind of made a commitment that when I was on council anyway, that we would do whatever we could to, you know, improve the. You know, I think we kind of thought green in a way. I'm not sure they do today. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, politics goes in waves. You'll have one group in there for a while, and when they fall out of favor, then you get the other one, and it just keeps going back and forth.
Like I say, White Lake and Muskegon Lake are kind of like twins in a way. Muskegon Lake.
And this was on the shore where they were dumping into the lake. Yeah. And so I asked Janet the other day, I says, can Jerry dig up a couple of those pictures?
Oh my.
And
okay. All right. How did the changes affect you and your family or your business if you had one?
Well, it really ruined the business. I mean, that part that people couldn't take it. That's.
Did you take any action during the time of pollution, such as writing letters or contacting government officials?
I have a file.
Make a copy of that one.
From 1975.
We have stuff in our house.
We did, but when we moved to the condo, I think between Debbie and Janet, they have most of that stuff. Hid someplace, but that's where I got it, was from Janet.
What kind of stuff? Did you write letters to the city or
I have them. Oh, yeah. City council.